I was 17 when I decided I was mature enough to explore the hidden parts of the internet. My friends at school always talked about the dark web like it was some kind of forbidden treasure, full of secrets that only the brave dared to discover. I wanted to be one of those brave ones. It was a Saturday night in October when I finally worked up the courage. My parents had gone out to dinner with some friends and wouldn't be back until late. I had the whole house to myself, which was perfect because I didn't want anyone interrupting my first venture into that unknown world. I had been researching for weeks on how to access it safely. I downloaded Tor, set up a VPN, and even covered my webcam with black tape. I felt like a professional hacker, even though I barely knew the basics of computing. My plan was simple: get in, take a quick look at some sites, and get out without leaving a trace. At first, everything seemed pretty boring. The first sites I visited were mainly markets where they sold illegal stuff, but nothing too disturbing. Drugs, fake documents, that kind of thing. I was curious, but it wasn't exactly what I expected to find. I wanted something more exciting. That's when I found a link that simply said, "The Gallery." There was no description, just that name in white letters on a black background. Something about the simplicity of that name caught my attention. I clicked without thinking too much about it. The page took several minutes to load, which should have been my first warning sign. When it finally appeared on screen, I saw what looked like a very minimalist digital art gallery. There were small image thumbnails organized in perfect rows like a virtual museum. The first images looked like normal old photographs. Families posing for portraits, children playing in yards, people at weddings. Everything looked like photos you might find in your grandmother's attic, but something about them seemed strange to me. The people in the photos had an empty expression in their eyes, as if they were looking through the camera instead of at it. I kept browsing through the gallery, clicking on different sections. There were categories organized by decades: 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on up to present. Each section had hundreds, maybe thousands of photographs. The strange thing was that all the photos seemed to have been taken from the same distance and angle. It was as if the same person had been present at all these intimate moments in these families' lives. Weddings, birthdays, family dinners, even some that seemed to have been taken through windows. My curiosity turned to unease when I reached the present section. The photos here were clearly more recent. Some seemed to have been taken with high-quality digital cameras. But what chilled my blood was that I recognized some of the places. There was a photo of the pizzeria where my older sister worked, another of the park where I used to play soccer with my friends on weekends. With trembling hands, I kept browsing through that section. Each image brought me closer to home. Literally. There was a photo of my street taken from the end of the block, then one of my neighbor watering his garden, then one of my house taken from the car parked in front. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to close the page, but something forced me to keep looking. I needed to know what else was there. Then I saw it. A photo of myself, taken through my bedroom window. I was sitting exactly where I was now, in front of my computer. The photo had been taken from the big tree in our backyard. I could see my face perfectly, illuminated by the screen light. But the most disturbing thing wasn't that someone had been spying on me. The most disturbing thing was the date and time in the bottom right corner of the image. It had been taken exactly 3 days ago. My hands trembled as I tried to close the page, but the browser wasn't responding. The screen froze on that image of myself. I tried pressing Alt plus F4, Control Alt Delete, even the computer's power button, but nothing worked. Then a message appeared at the bottom of the screen: "Welcome to my collection. You have been a very interesting subject to photograph." A chat opened automatically in the right corner. The words appeared slowly, as if someone was typing them in real time. "I have many more photos of you. Would you like to see them?" I didn't respond. I couldn't respond. My keyboard seemed to have stopped working completely. "I have been documenting your life for the past 6 months," the message continued. "You have a very predictable routine: school at 8, home at 3:30, part-time job on Wednesdays and Fridays, soccer on Saturdays. Very orderly." The images on screen began changing automatically, like a slideshow. I saw photos of myself leaving home, walking to school, talking with friends, even sleeping. All taken without me having any idea I was being watched. But my favorite, the next message appeared, is this one. The screen showed a photo of myself in my room, sleeping, but it hadn't been taken from outside. It had been taken from inside my bedroom, from the foot of my bed. The image quality was perfect, as if it had been taken with flash, but I was still sleeping peacefully. The final message appeared. See you soon, Miguel. I have some ideas for new photographs. Somehow, the computer turned off by itself. I sat in the total darkness of my room with only the streetlight filtering through my window, that same window from which someone had been photographing me. I ran downstairs and stayed in the living room until my parents returned. I told them I had had a nightmare, but I couldn't tell them the truth. How do you explain that you've been stalked by someone who knows your full name, your daily routine, and apparently has been inside your room while you slept? That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide someone with a camera. I moved my bed away from the window and put a chair against my bedroom door. The next morning, I searched my entire room looking for some hidden device, some small camera, anything that would explain how they had taken that photo from inside my bedroom. I found nothing, but that didn't calm me down. Over the following weeks, I completely changed my routine. I took different routes to school, left at different times. I even quit the soccer team. My parents noticed the change and asked me if everything was okay, but I just told them I was going through a phase. I never used Tor again. In fact, I barely use the internet now, except for school assignments. I've thought 1,000 times about going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I found a website with photos of me, but I can no longer access it? That someone somehow entered my room without leaving a trace? The most disturbing thing is that, to this day, I don't know if that digital collector is still out there. I don't know if he's still taking photos, if he's still documenting other people's lives without them knowing. Sometimes when I walk down the street, I feel like someone is watching me, that someone is capturing that moment to add it to their gallery. And the worst part of all is that now, every time I see a camera, every time someone takes a photo, I wonder, where will that image end up? Who will see it? Who could be collecting moments of my life without me knowing? Curiosity almost ruined my life, and if there's one thing I've learned from this whole experience, it's that some places on the internet are hidden for a reason. Some secrets are better left buried in the darkness where they belong.
I was 22 and fresh out of college when I got my first real job at a tech startup downtown. The company specialized in data analysis, and I was hired as a junior analyst. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well, and I was excited to finally be using my computer science degree for something meaningful. The office was one of those modern, open-concept spaces with exposed brick walls and industrial lighting. There were about 30 employees, mostly young professionals like myself. Everyone seemed friendly enough, though I noticed that people tended to keep to themselves, especially the senior staff. My supervisor, David, was a man in his mid-30s who had been with the company since its founding 3 years earlier. He was quiet but helpful, always willing to answer my questions about the various projects we worked on. Most of our clients were marketing firms looking to understand consumer behavior patterns. Nothing too exciting but steady work. About 2 months into the job, David approached me with what he called a special project. He explained that the company had been selected to work with a government contractor on a classified data analysis assignment. The pay was significantly higher than my regular salary, but it would require working late nights and weekends. I was struggling with student loans and rent, so the extra money was too tempting to pass up. David handed me a thick non-disclosure agreement to sign, explaining that the project was highly sensitive and that I couldn't discuss it with anyone, not even my family or friends. The work began the following Monday. I was given access to a separate computer system, isolated from the main company network. David explained that this was for security purposes. The interface was unlike anything I had seen before. It looked more like something from the early days of computing, with green text on a black background and command line inputs. My job was to analyze what David called behavioral datasets. The data came in the form of massive spreadsheets containing what appeared to be digital activity logs. There were timestamps, IP addresses, website visits, search queries, and even keystroke patterns. It was incredibly detailed information about people's online habits. At first, I assumed this was some kind of market research data, maybe collected from volunteers who had agreed to have their internet activity monitored in exchange for payment. But as I dug deeper into the datasets, I began to notice some disturbing patterns. The data wasn't anonymous like typical research data. It contained real names, addresses, phone numbers, and even social security numbers. I could see everything these people did online, every website they visited, every message they sent, every purchase they made. It was like having complete access to someone's digital life. One night, while working late on a particularly large dataset, I decided to search for my own information, just out of curiosity. I typed in my name and was shocked to find my own data in the system. Everything was there: my social media activity, my online shopping habits, even private messages I had sent to friends. The data went back over 2 years, long before I had started working at this company. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through the entries. Someone had been monitoring my digital life in incredible detail. They knew about my college grades, my job applications, even my dating history from apps like Tinder and Bumble. There were notes attached to some entries, written by someone with the initials DK, David's initials. The notes were analytical and cold, like I was some kind of research subject. Subject shows high adaptability to new environments, demonstrates strong technical skills but limited questioning of authority. Ideal candidate for recruitment. I realized with growing horror that I hadn't been hired for my qualifications. I had been recruited because I fit some kind of profile they were looking for. This whole job was a setup, and I was just another data point in their system. I tried to access more files to understand the scope of what was happening, but my access permissions were limited. However, I did manage to find a folder labeled Active Monitoring that contained thousands of names. These weren't just random people, they were all young professionals in tech, finance, and government positions. People with access to sensitive information or systems. The most disturbing discovery came when I found a subfolder called Converted Assets. It contained profiles of people who had been successfully recruited into what the documents referred to as the network. Each profile included detailed psychological assessments, leverage points, and current assignments. These people weren't employees, they were assets. They had been systematically identified, monitored, and then recruited into some kind of intelligence operation. And based on the notes in my own file, I was being groomed to join them. I knew I had to get out, but I also knew it wouldn't be that simple. These people had been watching me for years before they even approached me. They probably knew every move I made, every person I talked to. If I suddenly quit or tried to expose them, they would know immediately. I decided to play along while I figured out an escape plan. I continued working on the datasets, pretending everything was normal. But I started paying attention to my coworkers in a new way. How many of them were like me, unwitting recruits who had been manipulated into this position? How many were willing participants in whatever this operation really was? I noticed that several of my colleagues worked the same late-night shifts I did, always on special projects that required additional security clearances. We never talked about our work, but I started to see the signs, the stress, the paranoia, the way they would glance around nervously when anyone mentioned their assignments. 3 weeks after my discovery, David called me into his office for what he termed a performance review. He congratulated me on my excellent work and mentioned that there might be opportunities for advancement if I continued to demonstrate loyalty and discretion. Then he showed me a tablet with photos. They were surveillance photos of me at home, at the grocery store, at my gym. Someone had been following me, documenting my daily routine. David explained that this level of monitoring was standard for employees working on classified projects. but his smile told me it was really a warning. "We take care of our valuable team members," he said, "but we also expect complete commitment to the organization. I'm sure you understand." That night, I made my decision. I couldn't go to the police because I had signed the NDA and had no proof that would hold up in court. Instead, I decided to disappear. I had been saving money from the high-paying special project, so I had enough to start over somewhere else. I quit my apartment, sold my car, and bought a bus ticket to a city on the other coast where I didn't know anyone. I changed my name, got a new social security number through a legal name change, and found work doing freelance web development under my new identity. It's been 3 years since I left that job, and I still look over my shoulder every day. I don't use social media. I pay for everything in cash when possible, and I change my phone number every few months. I know they're probably still out there, still recruiting people like me, still building their network of unwitting assets. The scariest part is that I have no idea who they really were or what they wanted all that data for. Were they working for the government, a foreign intelligence service, some kind of private intelligence company? I'll probably never know. But I do know this. If you ever get offered a job that seems too good to be true, especially one that involves handling sensitive data or requires unusual security measures, ask yourself why they chose you. Because chances are, they've been watching you a lot longer than you think. And if you're young, talented, and have access to important systems or information, you might already be in their database. You might already be a target for recruitment. The only question is whether you'll recognize it before it's too late, like I almost didn't. Sometimes I wonder about the people I left behind at that company. Did they ever figure out what was really happening? Are they still working there, still believing they're just doing data analysis for marketing companies? Or have they been fully converted into assets, carrying out assignments they don't even realize are part of something much larger and more dangerous? I try not to think about it too much, but the reality is that in our digital age, privacy is an illusion. Someone, somewhere, is always watching, always collecting data, always looking for people they can use. The question isn't whether you're being monitored, it's whether you're valuable enough to be recruited.
I used to think that I was pretty tech-savvy. I'd been programming since I was 12, built my own computers, and even did some freelance cybersecurity consulting during college. So when my curiosity about the dark web finally got the better of me last year, I thought I had all the precautions covered. I was 24, living alone in a studio apartment, working remotely for a small software company. The isolation of remote work, especially during the pandemic lockdowns, had made me increasingly curious about the hidden corners of the internet. I'd heard all the stories, the markets, the forums, the things you couldn't unsee, but I wanted to experience it firsthand. I spent weeks preparing. I set up a completely separate laptop that I'd never used for anything personal. I installed multiple VPNs, configured Tor with all the security settings maxed out, and even went so far as to use a public Wi-Fi connection 3 blocks away from my apartment. I thought I was untouchable. My first few excursions were pretty mundane. I browsed some of the well-known marketplaces, read through various forums, and generally just observed without participating. It was fascinating in a disturbing way, like looking at a completely parallel version of the internet where normal rules didn't apply. After about a week of casual browsing, I discovered something called mirror sites. These were apparently exact replicas of regular websites, but hosted on the dark web. The idea was that you could access sites that might be blocked in certain countries, or browse familiar content anonymously. I found what claimed to be a mirror of Reddit. The URL was similar, but with the .onion extension. And when I loaded it, it looked exactly like the regular Reddit homepage. Same layout, same logo, even the same trending posts. It seemed legitimate enough. I started browsing casually, reading posts and comments just like I would on the regular site. Everything seemed normal until I noticed something odd about the usernames. They all seemed familiar, like I'd seen them before, but I couldn't place where. Then I saw my own username. Not a similar username, not someone using the same handle. It was exactly my username, complete with the numbers and underscore I'd been using since high school. But I hadn't created an account on this mirror site. I'd been careful not to log into anything or create any new accounts during my dark web browsing. I clicked on the username and was taken to a profile page. It showed my post history, my comment history, even private messages I'd sent on the real Reddit. But there were also posts I'd never made, comments I'd never written, conversations I'd never had.
The additional posts were subtle at first. Comments on threads I'd never visited, upvotes on content I'd never seen. But as I scrolled through the history, the fake activity became more disturbing. There were posts asking for advice about illegal activities, comments expressing political views I didn't hold, and worst of all, private messages to other users discussing things I would never discuss. I tried to log out, but realized I was never logged in to begin with. Somehow, this mirror site was displaying an account that I'd never created, showing activity that wasn't mine, all under my real username and linked to my actual Reddit history. That's when I noticed something else. All the other usernames I'd recognized earlier, they were usernames I'd seen on the real Reddit. Friends, frequent commenters on subreddits I visited, even some minor internet celebrities. This mirror site wasn't just replicating Reddit's content, it was replicating its users and then fabricating additional activity for them. I quickly navigated to what claimed to be a mirror of Facebook. The same thing was happening there. My real profile information was displayed, along with posts and interactions I'd never made. But these fake posts were even more concerning. They showed me expressing interest in extremist ideologies, sharing conspiracy theories, and engaging with content that would definitely put me on some kind of government watch list. The mirror of Twitter was the worst. It showed me tweeting threats, sharing illegal content, and communicating with accounts that were obviously involved in criminal activities. If anyone in law enforcement saw this fake activity and thought it was real, it could destroy my life. I tried to understand what was happening. Someone had created these mirror sites not just to replicate normal websites, but to frame innocent people by fabricating criminal or extremist activity under their real identities. But who was doing this, and why? I decided to dig deeper into the mirror site's code, using my programming skills to understand how it was built. What I found was sophisticated beyond anything I had expected. The site wasn't just scraping content from the real internet, it was actively generating new content using AI, creating believable posts and interactions that looked like they came from real users.
Even more disturbing, the site seemed to be learning from the real users' behavior patterns. The fake posts generated for me matched my writing style, used phrases I commonly used, and discussed topics I was actually interested in. It was like someone had fed all my online activity into a machine learning algorithm and taught it to impersonate me. I found logs showing that the mirror sites were being accessed by IP addresses from various government agencies and law enforcement organizations. Someone was using these fake profiles to build cases against innocent people, or at least create enough digital evidence to justify investigations. The implications were terrifying. How many people had been arrested or investigated based on fake activity generated by these mirror sites? How many lives have been ruined by AI-generated posts that law enforcement thought were real? I tried to document everything, taking screenshots and copying code, but every time I tried to save anything to my laptop, the files would disappear. The mirror site seemed to have some kind of protection against evidence collection. Then I made a crucial mistake. In my eagerness to understand how the system worked, I clicked on a link that claimed to show the site's user database. Instead of loading a new page, it triggered what I can only describe as a digital trap. My screen went black, then displayed a simple message: unauthorized access detected, user identity logged. Then it showed my real name, my address, my social security number, and a photo that looked like it had been taken from my driver's license database. The message continued: Your attempt to compromise this system has been recorded and reported to relevant authorities. Expect contact within 72 hours. I immediately shut down the laptop and destroyed the hard drive. I knew it was probably too late, but I had to try to eliminate any evidence that I'd been on that site. I moved out of my apartment that same night, staying with a friend across town while I figured out what to do next. For weeks, I lived in paranoia, expecting federal agents to show up at any moment. I monitored the news obsessively, looking for stories about people being arrested for online activity they claimed they didn't engage in. I found more cases than I wanted to count. The contacts never came, which almost made it worse. I don't know if they were just trying to scare me, or if they're still building a case, or if I'm now part of some larger database of people they're monitoring. What keeps me awake at night is the realization that this technology could be used against anyone. All it takes is someone accessing your real social media profiles, feeding your data into their AI system, and suddenly there's a criminal version of you somewhere on the dark web, engaging in activities you never even imagined. I've completely changed how I use the internet now. I use different usernames for everything. I never post anything that could be used to build a personality profile, and I regularly search for my name and information to see if fake profiles are being created anywhere. But the damage might already be done. Somewhere out there might be mirror sites showing me engaging in criminal activity, expressing dangerous ideologies, or plotting violent acts. And if law enforcement ever finds those sites, they might not question whether the activity is real or fabricated. The scariest part is that I have no way to prove my innocence if those fake profiles ever come to light. How do you prove you didn't post something? How do you demonstrate that an AI generated content in your name without your knowledge? In our digital age, the assumption is that if something exists online, someone real must have created it. I used to think the biggest danger of the dark web was accidentally seeing something horrible or stumbling into illegal marketplaces. I never imagined that the real danger was having my identity stolen and weaponized against me by systems I didn't even know existed. If there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that our digital identities are more vulnerable than we realize. Every post we make, every comment we leave, every interaction we have online is data that can be used to create convincing fakes. And in a world where law enforcement and intelligence agencies are increasingly relying on digital evidence, those fakes could have very real consequences. I still don't know who was running those mirror sites or what their ultimate goal was. Were they trying to frame specific individuals, create chaos by generating fake evidence against random people? Or was it part of some larger operation to destabilize trust in digital evidence altogether? What I do know is that they're probably still out there, still creating fake profiles, still generating false evidence against innocent people. And the next time someone gets arrested for online activity they swear they didn't engage in, I'll wonder if they encountered the same mirror sites that almost destroyed my life.
I've been a freelance web developer for about 5 years now, working with clients ranging from small businesses to personal bloggers. The work isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me the flexibility to work from home. Most of my projects are pretty straightforward, building websites, fixing security issues, updating content management systems. Nothing too complicated, nothing too exciting. That changed last March when I received an email from a potential client named Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell. She explained that she needed help with her personal website, which she used to showcase her research in behavioral psychology. The pay she offered was significantly higher than my usual rates, almost 3 times what I normally charged for similar work. Dr. Hartwell explained that she was having issues with her website's security and suspected that someone had been tampering with her files. She needed me to do a complete security audit and clean up any malicious code that might have been planted. She was particularly concerned because her research dealt with sensitive psychological profiles, and she couldn't afford to have that data compromised. The project seemed legitimate enough, and I definitely needed the money. I'd been struggling to find consistent work lately, so this well-paying project felt like a godsend. I agreed to take on the job, and Dr. Hartwell immediately sent over the login credentials and access information. When I first logged into her website's backend, everything looked normal. It was a typical academic website with pages for her biography, research publications, and contact information. The design was clean but outdated, probably built several years ago and not maintained very well since then. I started by running standard security scans to check for malware or unauthorized access. The scans came back clean, which seemed odd given her concerns about tampering. I decided to dig deeper into the file structure to see if there were any hidden files or suspicious code. That's when I discovered a hidden directory called Client Sessions that wasn't visible through the normal website interface. The directory was password protected, but Dr. Hartwell had included those credentials in her initial email, explaining that this was where she stored her research data. When I accessed the directory, I found dozens of video files, each labeled with dates and what appeared to be patient initials. At first, I assumed these were recordings of therapy sessions or research interviews. As a professional, I knew I shouldn't watch them, but I needed to understand the file structure to properly secure the website. I opened one of the more recent files, expecting to see a standard therapy session recording. What I saw instead made my stomach turn. The video showed what looked like a basement or underground room with concrete walls and no windows. In the center was a chair where a young woman sat, clearly distressed and restrained. Dr. Hartwell's voice could be heard off camera, asking questions about the woman's fears, her family, her daily routines. But this wasn't therapy, it was an interrogation. The woman was pleading to be let go, saying she had been missing for days and that her family would be looking for her. Dr. Hartwell's response was clinical and detached, as if she was conducting a routine psychological evaluation rather than holding someone against their will. I immediately closed the video, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I'd just seen. I told myself it might be some kind of role-playing exercise or training video for psychology students, but deep down, I knew what I had witnessed was real. Against my better judgment, I opened another file, this one labeled with initials and a date from 6 months earlier. It showed a different room, but the same setup: concrete walls, a chair, and another young person who appeared to be held captive. Dr. Hartwell was conducting what she called fear response analysis, subjecting the person to various psychological tortures while documenting their reactions. The videos were meticulously organized by date, going back over 2 years. Each file was labeled with clinical precision, as if documenting legitimate research rather than what appeared to be kidnapping and psychological torture. There were dozens of different victims, all young adults, all clearly being held against their will. In addition to the videos, the directory contained detailed psychological profiles of each victim. Dr. Hartwell had documented their backgrounds, their fears, their family situations, and their psychological responses to various forms of manipulation and intimidation. It was like a database of human suffering, organized with scientific precision. I realized I was looking at evidence of multiple kidnappings and possibly murders. Dr. Hartwell wasn't a legitimate researcher. She was a predator who had been using her psychological expertise to systematically torture people while documenting the process for her own twisted purposes. The worst part was realizing that she had hired me not because her website had been compromised, but because she wanted someone to help her better secure her evidence. She was paying me to help her hide her crimes more effectively. I knew I had to contact the authorities, but I also knew that I needed to preserve the evidence. If I simply called the police without securing the files, Dr. Hartwell might delete everything before they could investigate. I started downloading copies of the videos and documents, creating a backup that I could turn over to law enforcement. As I was copying the files, I noticed that the most recent video was dated just 3 days earlier. Dr. Hartwell was still actively holding someone captive. Whoever was in that latest video might still be alive, still being tortured in whatever basement or underground facility she was using. I tried calling the police, but explaining the situation was complicated. How do you tell them that you discovered evidence of multiple kidnappings while doing freelance web development work? The officer I spoke to seemed skeptical and asked me to come to the station to give a formal statement. While I was preparing to go to the police, I received another email from Dr. Hartwell. She thanked me for the excellent work I was doing and mentioned that she had a new research subject that she was particularly excited to study. The casual way she referred to what was clearly another victim made me feel sick. I immediately drove to the police station and handed over everything I had found. The detective I spoke with took the evidence seriously once he saw the videos, and within hours, they had obtained a warrant to search Dr. Hartwell's property. What they found was worse than I had imagined. Her house had a hidden basement that had been converted into multiple holding cells and a recording studio. They found evidence linking her to at least 15 disappearances over the past 3 years. Most disturbing of all, they rescued 2 people who were still alive in her basement, including the person from the most recent video I had seen. Dr. Hartwell was arrested and charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, assault, and murder. During her trial, it came out that she had been using her credentials as a psychologist to identify and target vulnerable individuals. She would study their social media profiles, learn their routines, and then abduct them when they were most isolated. The trial was a media sensation, with Dr. Hartwell being dubbed the research killer by the press. I had to testify about how I discovered the evidence, which was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. Knowing that I had inadvertently helped her secure her evidence, even briefly, still haunts me. Dr. Hartwell was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The 2 people who were rescued are still recovering from their ordeal, and the families of her other victims finally have some closure. But I can't stop thinking about how many more people might have suffered if I hadn't stumbled across those files. The experience completely changed how I approach freelance work. I now thoroughly research every potential client before taking on any project. I've turned down several jobs that seemed too good to be true or came from people who couldn't provide proper references. The money isn't worth the risk of unknowingly helping someone commit crimes. I also can't shake the feeling that there might be other predators out there who are using legitimate-seeming businesses to hide their activities. How many freelancers, contractors, and service providers might be unknowingly helping criminals without realizing it? How many websites, databases, and digital systems are being used to facilitate horrors that we can't even imagine? Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had simply done the job as requested without looking too closely at those files. Dr. Hartwell would still be out there, still kidnapping people, still conducting her twisted experiments. Those 2 survivors might not have survived much longer. I'm grateful that I discovered the truth when I did, but I'm also traumatized by what I saw in those videos. I've been in therapy for months, trying to process the knowledge that I was so close to evil without realizing it. The images from those videos still wake me up at night, and I doubt I'll ever completely forget what I witnessed. The case taught me that evil doesn't always look like what we expect. Dr. Hartwell seemed like a legitimate professional, someone who had devoted her life to understanding human psychology. But she had used that knowledge not to help people, but to find more effective ways to cause them suffering. It also made me realize how vulnerable we all are in the digital age. Our online presence, our social media profiles, our digital footprints, they can all be used by predators to study us, to learn our weaknesses, to identify us as potential victims. We share so much of our lives online without thinking about who might be watching, who might be taking notes, who might be planning to use that information against us. I still do freelance work, but I'm much more careful now about who I work with and what projects I take on. And every time I log into a client's website or database, I can't help but wonder what I might find hidden in the files, what secrets might be lurking in directories I'm not supposed to access. Because the truth is, you never know who you're really working for until it's too late.
I was 26 and working night shifts at a cybersecurity firm when I first encountered what I would later learn was called the Watchers Network. My job involved monitoring client systems for intrusions and analyzing suspicious network activity. It was routine work most of the time, checking logs, investigating false alarms, updating security protocols. I thought I had seen every type of cyber threat imaginable. That changed one night in September when I noticed unusual traffic patterns across multiple client networks. It wasn't typical malware or hacking attempts. Instead, it looked like coordinated data collection happening simultaneously across dozens of different companies and organizations. Someone was systematically accessing cameras, microphones, and other IoT devices, but they were being incredibly careful not to trigger standard security alerts. At first, I assumed it was a sophisticated corporate espionage operation. But as I dug deeper into the network logs, I realized the scope was far beyond anything I had seen before. The intrusions weren't targeting business secrets or financial data. They were specifically accessing personal devices, smartphones, laptops, smart TVs, even smart home devices like Alexa and Google Home. What made it even more disturbing was the precision of the targeting. Whoever was behind this wasn't randomly accessing devices. They had specific lists of targets organized by location, age, profession, and other demographic factors. They were building comprehensive surveillance profiles on thousands of ordinary people. I decided to trace the network traffic back to its source, which led me down a rabbit hole that I wish I had never entered. The data was being routed through multiple proxy servers and encrypted channels, but I eventually tracked it to a series of servers hosted on the dark web. These weren't typical criminal marketplaces or hacking forums. They were something much more organized and professional.
The main site looked like a corporate intranet, complete with user logins, project dashboards, and professional documentation. But instead of business metrics, it was tracking surveillance operations. There were real-time feeds from thousands of compromised devices, organized by geographic region and target demographic. I couldn't access most of the site without proper credentials, but I was able to view some of the public-facing areas. What I found there shook me to my core. It was a marketplace for live surveillance feeds. Users could purchase access to cameras and microphones in people's homes, offices, and personal devices. They could watch strangers' private moments, listen to their conversations, and even interact with their smart home systems. The pricing structure was disturbing in its banality. Basic packages offered access to a few dozen feeds for a monthly subscription fee. Premium packages included thousands of feeds, sorted by specific criteria like young professionals, families with children, or elderly living alone. There was even a custom option where buyers could request surveillance of specific individuals if they provided enough personal information. But the most horrifying discovery was in the interactive services section. This wasn't just passive surveillance, it was active manipulation. Subscribers could pay extra to have operators remotely access their targets' devices to create entertainment scenarios. This included making lights flicker, playing sounds through speakers, sending fake notifications, or even manipulating smart home devices to create the appearance of paranormal activity. I realized I was looking at a massive operation that was systematically terrorizing innocent people for profit. Those stories you hear about people experiencing unexplained phenomena in their homes, about smart devices acting strangely, about feeling like they're being watched, many of those might not be technical glitches or paranoia. They might be victims of this network.
The more I investigated, the more sophisticated the operation appeared. They had teams of social engineers who would research potential targets, technical specialists who would compromise their devices, and customer service representatives who would help subscribers maximize their surveillance experience. It was organized like a legitimate business, complete with user manuals and technical support. I found evidence that the network had been operating for at least 3 years and had accumulated surveillance access to over 500,000 devices worldwide. They had detailed profiles on the people they were watching, including work schedules, family relationships, personal habits, and psychological vulnerabilities. Some profiles included notes about how targets reacted to different types of manipulation, as if they were testing subjects in some kind of psychological experiment. The most disturbing profiles were labeled as premium subjects, individuals who had been under surveillance for extended periods and showed interesting reactions to manipulation. These people were being systematically psychologically tortured by strangers who paid money to watch them suffer. The network was essentially facilitating psychological abuse as a form of entertainment. I knew I had to report this to law enforcement, but I also knew that the evidence would be difficult to preserve. The network used sophisticated security measures, and if they detected my investigation, they would likely shut down and relocate before authorities could take action. I decided to document everything I could find while simultaneously gathering information about specific victims who might be willing to come forward. I spent weeks carefully copying surveillance logs, user communications, and technical documentation that could be used as evidence. During my investigation, I discovered that the network had a disturbing social component. Subscribers could communicate with each other about their watching experiences, sharing favorite targets, and comparing manipulation techniques. They had developed a whole culture around voyeurism and psychological abuse, treating their victims like characters in an entertainment program. Some subscribers seemed to get addicted to the power of controlling their targets' environments. They would spend hours each day watching their assigned feeds, planning elaborate manipulation scenarios, and competing with other subscribers to see who could create the most dramatic reactions. It was like a game to them, but the consequences for their victims were very real. I found forum posts from subscribers discussing how they had driven their targets to seek therapy, change jobs, or even move homes because of the stress caused by unexplained phenomena. They celebrated these outcomes as success stories and shared techniques for maximizing psychological impact while avoiding detection. The worst posts came from a section called long-term projects, where subscribers discussed targets they had been manipulating for months or years. These victims had essentially become unwitting subjects in extended psychological experiments, with subscribers documenting how sustained manipulation affected their mental health, relationships, and life decisions.
After collecting what I hoped was enough evidence, I contacted the FBI's cybercrime division. The agent I spoke with was initially skeptical, but became very interested when I showed him the scale of the operation. Within days, I was working with a joint task force that included federal agents, international cybercrime specialists, and victim advocacy groups. The investigation that followed was one of the largest cybercrime operations in recent history. The network's servers were located in multiple countries, and coordinating the takedown required cooperation from law enforcement agencies around the world. When they finally executed simultaneous raids, they arrested over 200 people involved in running or subscribing to the network. The evidence I had gathered helped identify thousands of victims who had no idea they were being watched. Many of these people have been experiencing unexplained stress, anxiety, and paranoia for months or years without understanding why. Learning that their suffering had been deliberately caused by strangers who paid money to watch them suffer was devastating for many victims. During the trial, it came out that the network had generated millions of dollars in subscription revenue. The operators have been living lavish lifestyles funded by the psychological torment of innocent people. Many of the subscribers were ordinary people, office workers, retirees, even some in law enforcement and government positions who had become addicted to the power of surveilling and manipulating others. The case received significant media attention and led to new legislation regarding smart device security and unauthorized surveillance. But I know that shutting down one network doesn't solve the underlying problem. The technology that made this operation possible is still widely available, and the demand for this kind of surveillance clearly exists. I've changed careers since then. I couldn't continue working in cybersecurity after seeing how easily our connected devices can be weaponized against us. I now work as a privacy advocate, helping people secure their digital lives and advocating them about the risks of smart home technology. But I'm haunted by the knowledge that there are probably other networks out there, other groups of people who have figured out how to monetize surveillance and psychological manipulation. Every time someone tells me about strange things happening in their home, about devices acting oddly, or about feeling like they're being watched, I wonder if they might be victims of a network I haven't discovered yet. The most disturbing aspect of this case wasn't the technology involved, it was the human element. Hundreds of people had chosen to pay money to violate strangers' privacy and cause them psychological harm. They had turned surveillance into entertainment and suffering into profit. That level of casual cruelty is something that will stay with me forever. We live in an age where our homes are filled with connected devices that can be turned into instruments of surveillance and manipulation. The convenience these devices offer comes with risks that most people don't fully understand. And as this case proved, there are people out there who are ready to exploit those vulnerabilities for profit, turning our most private spaces into theaters for their twisted entertainment. If there's one thing I learned from investigating the Watchers Network, it's that privacy isn't just about protecting our data. It's about protecting our peace of mind, our sense of security, and our fundamental right to exist without being turned into someone else's entertainment. In our connected world, that's becoming harder to guarantee than most people realize.